Yo Piraka! Welcome to this episode of the Bionicle Inspiration Series. There's really no other way to begin this episode in before the Piraka rap jokes. There we go. So, today we're going to be talking about Skadi or Piraka. You may remember them as some of the bad guys from some of the old Bionicle sets from Bionicle G1. They looked like these guys. Some of them were Dark Hunters. They were all Dark Hunters for that matter. But the Piraka were pretty cool. And of course, they have some really interesting pieces that you can use in some fascinating and fun ways. And so we're going to talk about that today. We're going to look at some specific Skadi mocks. And also just take a look at some of the pieces that the Piraka specifically used and how you could implement those into your mocks as a whole. So let's begin. The first mock we've got today is by a librarian bot and is called Skadi. Now, you might be like, what does that word mean? That's essentially the species that the Piraka were. One of my favorite things about this mock is the kind of lanky design that it's got. You know, typically with proportions, your hands kind of fall sort of just under the waist kind of thing. But here, they're a lot longer and a lot more kind of lanky and just bigger, and the torso's a little bit shorter than it should be, all that sort of stuff. And I like that. It kind of makes him look a little bit more menacing, almost a little bit reptilian to some degree, and it just adds a lot of personality to the mock, which I really like. And plus that too, you know, sometimes people can get very focused on making sure that proportions are all proportionate in scale and everything like that. And as nice and cool as that is, we see a mock like this where that's not the case, and it actually works really well. It shows a lot of character, it does a lot for the mock, and it's just cool. So if you're worrying about your proportions, well, try having it be non-typical proportions. I mean, heck, the Skadi are their own original sort of species in the Bionicle world, so there's no reason that they need to adhere to typical human proportions. I also like the really simple but effective color scheme. Sort of silver and that dark green there works really well, and it's also really interesting to see how well that is complemented by black. It doesn't really look like there's much else that is that dark green color in this mock, but the black is close enough on the color spectrum to actually looking like the dark green color there, so actually kind of works. It's interesting to note that you don't necessarily need to specifically focus on those exact colors. You can use things that are a little bit closer, and it all sort of flows nicely together. One of my favorite things, though, is the foot design on this mock, using the Bionicle foot pieces, but then sort of detailing them at the bottom with some Technic pieces to kind of form your own sort of custom version of the typical kind of Piraka foot that sort of has that exact sort of shape. It's a really, really clever way of doing that, really unique. And, you know, maybe you're sitting around and you go, oh, I actually really want that part on my mock, but I actually don't have any, or I've used them in other mocks, so I don't want to take that one apart, so what do I do? Well, you could do something like this, where you kind of just build a custom version of a piece that already exists. I think that's a really interesting concept, and this here is a really awesome example of it, because honestly, I barely noticed that until just before I started recording, and I was like, oh, that's super cool. So by all means, try that on your own stuff, because like we see here, it works really well. I also really like the weapons on this mock too. This sort of interesting design that sort of, they're kind of on the wrists like that, and it kind of looks like they could extend forward or backwards sort of thing. It's just an interesting, unique way of doing a weapon. I like it a lot. And then another thing on the weapons there, he has his Zamisphere launcher, but he's holding it sort of in a different way that the set typically did. Nice to see that the Zamisphere launcher there makes a reappearance, because of course that was the sort of typical weapon of the Piraka. So really interesting and really cool little addition there that works really nicely. It's especially nice too that he has those custom hands so he can really grip the gun. It's kind of a gun, Zamisphere launcher, may as well be a gun. He can kind of grip it in a cool way. Plus, a lot of character is kind of conveyed in that really awesome sort of clawed finger design like that, using some of those hinge pieces like that. Really, really nice design. So kind of a lot to love about this more simplistic mock. You know, it's got an Bionicle torso, it's just using the prefab limbs, but he sort of detailed them up in a little bit and added a few extra, you know, interesting concepts and ideas like the weapons and the feet and stuff like that. And it's already got a lot of personality going for it. It's really, really cool. Doesn't need to be overly complex. You can just use those prefab stuff, just kind of focus on color scheme, and you got a good mock. So really nice work, Mr. Librarian Bot. Let's move on to the next mock, which is by Poor Disadvantage, and is called Trodon the Poor and Disadvantage. So this is, of course, his self-mock. So a lot of really awesome stuff going on this mock. One of the coolest things is the fact that it is a Skadi. It's not a specific revamp of Redak, the Black Piraka, but he actually specifically said in his description here, Mr. Poor Disadvantaged, he was saying that he wanted to make his self-mock another in-universe character from Bionicle and didn't really want to just make another Toa, so he decided to make it a Skadi, which is, Skakdi? It's Skakdi, isn't it? Maybe I've been pronouncing it wrong this entire time, and you've been like, oh my god, Ben, you're so stupid. Well, you know, you can pronounce it however you want. It's a made-up universe. You do what you want. But besides the point, if you want to kind of stay in universe, that's something you could easily do. Instead of just building another Toa, maybe you've made heaps of Toas, you're kind of done with that. Try building some of the other in-universe species and stuff, the Skadi or Skakdi, however you want to pronounce it. They are only one of the many species in Bionicle, so take a look on Biosector or the Bionicle wiki and just sort of see what comes up, sort of do a bit of research and look up some species or animals or things and go, maybe I could build one of those. If you're a sucker for the lore, be a fun little thing to do. I really like all those sort of ball and chain and the cuff accessories and stuff. Puts so much character onto the Mock. He looks very sort of downtrodden and oppressed and everything. Really, really cool. And it's a really simple design too, using the I believe the big sort of white ball there, it's 2 canister pieces, but I'm not sure what they specifically were from. I want to say they're from Robo Riders. I might be wrong. But a whole bunch of the canister lids you could actually easily use on Bionicles. So if you have some older Bionicle canisters lying around, try playing around with them. Some of them had specific connection points and things. You could easily implement them into a mock. So that's something to consider. But yeah, those simple sort of ball chain and the neck brace and things like that, all of that stuff really does a lot for the mock, really adds a lot of character. It's super cool. And also he was able to play around with a lot of fun colors on this mock as well, using the metallic blue there, a bunch of Knights Kingdom parts that came in that color and some other swords and things, and then combining it with the black, and then having this little slight tinge of dark green in there as well. I really like that, whether that's sort of like a cloth or something that's around his waist, or he kind of seems to have this sort of tailcoat kind of thing. Maybe it's sort of some sort of like feathered cloth thing, or it's sort of kind of like a tail or something like that. It could be a whole bunch of different things, but either way, I think that little pop of dark green there actually does a lot for the mock and looks really cool. Plus, too, the shaping that he's been able to get on the sort of abs area there with that mask in dark green there is awesome. Those pieces flow so nicely together like that. And so I very much welcome this addition of dark green because it does that for the mock. It really helps with the shaping, but yeah, having that little accent color also does a lot too, which is pretty cool. Also interesting to note that he didn't use the Piraka skull piece, which you typically would have put in to the Piraka spine there. Instead, he's done a sort of custom version of that, so you can kind of see the tongue, some teeth and things. He's using a boat stud, and I believe some other sort of teeth pieces and things there. Looks awesome. You can barely tell that it's not using the typical skull piece there, but it's a really, really nice custom version of that, and having the little addition of the tongue and stuff at the back, you can kind of see little bits of red in there. Is a really welcome addition. It does a lot for the mock. And it's also cool as well, the fact that he has made this custom head here. He's been able to put 2 different colored eyes here as well, and it fit very well, surprisingly, really, really well. I had no idea how well those Piraka eye pieces fit into this specific Piraka spine head piece here. It's really, really cool to see. And, it kind of looks like, he's kind of gone blind in the one eye, or he's had some damage on it, so it's sort of glazed over a little bit like that. Really cool, really, really, again, lots of character. There's so much character in this mock, lots of little things that are doing that there, whether it's the cuffs or the eye, all sorts of different things. I love it. Also cool as well seeing the metallic blue mutter foot there sort of forming the basis of the lower arm there. Kind of just that one piece is sort of doing most of the work on that part of the mock, and just finding a little ways of adding some connection points here, putting the ball joint at the top there, or just sort of finding some ways of getting a ball joint to the bottom to get the arm attached to it. There's enough connection points on that mutter foot that it works well. And you've also got 2 where the foot would typically connect to the knee. He's added a ball joint and a little spike there just to kind of give him some pronounced sort of elbows. So yeah, a lot to love about this mock. Really solid work there. Poor disadvantage. Let's move on to the next mock, which is by Unuku and is called Dark Hunter Sting. So this is a female Skakdi, and it utilizes some other really interesting things. So obviously, of course, when you bought the Piraka sets, the canisters themselves had a mask on top, which you could actually remove. So technically, you actually got 2 masks within that set, which is really, really awesome. So there's no reason you couldn't use them in a mock like we've seen here. So instead of having the whole cumbersome, annoying spine that, it's all one big rubber piece and the rest of the spine, it might be too much to just sort of shove on the mock. Well, instead you could just use the canister bit, and then you literally just have the mask aspect and you don't have to worry about the spine. And then like we see on this mock here, he has in fact kind of made his own custom version of that spine using some of those other rubbery spine pieces that came on, well, those came on Gadunka, didn't they? Yes? No, those came on Nocturne. My bad, almost got that wrong. But really cool version of sort of doing a different take on the Piraka spine, but still very much having it look like the original thing. So there's always more than one way of doing something, like we see here. Very nicely done. I also really like the fact that he's used the Jin Urso torso piece here. Of course, this came with the Jin Urso Star Wars Ultra Build set. Not a bad set, very cheap, always seem to find them on clearance, but has a really awesome torso piece here because this torso piece is shaped a lot differently to the other typical torso pieces that you got on the Star Wars Ultra Build sets, and it has the sort of more feminine curved torso. Of course, it's got a little bit of a printing on it there, but you could easily remove that with some Brasso or a few other things, or scratch it off, all that sort of stuff. But the specific shape of this torso piece is so unique and interesting, and the fact that Onuku here was aiming to build a female Skadi, this is the perfect piece to use for that. And I believe one of the Rey Star Wars Ultra Build sets, more towards the end, her Last Jedi garb, has a very similarly shaped torso with, I believe it has printing on it as well, but again, you could easily remove that. But, if you're aiming to build a female mark, this is a really awesome solution for a not too custom torso, just to put that piece on the front there, because, the curves very much lend themselves to a female design, and it's perfect. Works really well. Also really love this one picture here with his little throwing knives there. Really nice, fun design, adding some of those trans clear parts so it looks like he's throwing them. Really cool idea. But, the more you look at this mark, you kind of look at the legs, you kind of look at the arms. It's a fairly simplistic design, simply using your prefab Bionicle pieces in multiple ways, adding some tires and things to kind of buff them out a little bit more. A little bit of custom stuff as you get towards the upper limbs there. But for the most part, they're relatively easy or simple to work with. And I like that, just that sort of simple thing of get a really interesting color scheme together, get some simple limbs, maybe spend a bit more time working out a custom torso or some slight custom areas for the arms and stuff, which, might be a little bit more complex. You kind of have to figure out some connection points and things. But overall, you sort of put all that together and you've got a really cool mock. There's a lot of power in doing that, just kind of grabbing the prefab limb pieces and spending a little bit of time going custom, or not custom at all, whatever. And as long as you're really conveying character, if you've got an interesting sort of accent point, so you've got an interesting color scheme, you're going to have done a pretty good job. And at the end of the day, as long as you're happy with what you've built, that's all that matters. So if you're aiming to go really complex and out there and come up with something fascinating that's never been done before, you don't really have to. You can still get a really awesome mock like this that, is a little bit more simplistic in areas, but has its more interesting moments of custom elements and awesome accent points of, a really great way of redesigning the Piraka head, some throwing knives, all that sort of cool stuff. There's a lot of ways of approaching a mock, and I think this is a really great way of doing it. So nice work, Onuku. Let's move on to the next mock, which is by Ao Okonon and is called Warwick. So I was talking before about how you could specifically use the Piraka pieces to make other mocks. So this mock and the next one are not specific Skadi or Piraka themed characters here. They just use some of the pieces. So we see the Piraka skull piece being used here, and as we can see, it's very effectively been implemented in with the Huki Murray mask. Of course, that mask didn't really have a bottom around where the mouth was, so instead you could add the teeth from that skull there very perfectly. So that's something to consider. Maybe there's certain masks that had that, for example, stuff that comes to mind. Some of the old Hero Factory 3.0 sets, the old jungle-themed stuff, some of those didn't have bottoms to the masks. Some of the other Hero Factory masks didn't as well. So by all means, you could easily try and implement those onto a Piraka skull like that, so you can kind of use that piece in some interesting and different ways. And like we see here, it's definitely forms a very interesting head design. And it forms a lot of character on the mock too, which is great. And I love the color blocking here, sort of having all the Keat orange being sort of focused at the top, and then the black being sort of more kind of where his pants are, sort of thing. Some nice color blocking going on. But definitely one of my favorite additions here is the wine bottles and some of the glasses and things like that. Really, really nice design using a bunch of these system 2x2 curved pieces and different shapes and sizes. Very, very cool. Adds a lot of character to the mark. Little accessories and things can really go a long way on conveying stuff with a character. And, these designs here are very, very simple to make, but look great and do a lot for Mr. Warwick here. So cool to see some of those Piraka pieces being used here. Really, it's just that Piraka skull that's being used here, but for the most part, it does a lot for the character. Makes a really interesting, different head design. So cool to see. And let's move on to the next mock, which is by EXX Trooper and is called 2 Arms, 2 Legs, and 2 Heads. Great name. So again, this mock is using those Piraka skulls, but he's not put anything on them at all. These Piraka masks work really well as just, straight up skulls. So by all means, if you're kind of going for a sort of skeleton look or something a little more sinister and evil looking, maybe the Piraka skull without anything on it is exactly what you need. Because it very much looks like a skull. It's kind of the point. And something else I like about this mock is its simplicity. It's a fun character, got a lot of, interesting dynamic going on. But then you read the description here that Mr. EXX Trooper has said. He said that this guy was made as if it could have been a real Lego set. which is why you might recognize some techniques that LEGO has used in their own Titan sets. So we take a look at a little bit of a deep dive into the mock here. We take a look at the legs. I believe that's a very, very similar design that we saw on Tuma. And for the most part, you can see like an Anika torso there for the torso and a few other things that you might recognize from some other Titan sets and things. But it works really well kind of combining all that together. And one that's also a really fun challenge is to be able to just make a set, but build it in the specific fashion where you go, well, these are the techniques that a typical LEGO set would use. I'm going to have a very limited piece selection. You take a look at some of the Bionicle sets. They didn't always have a lot of parts in them because, the sets had to be designed for a specific price range, so you could only have so many pieces in them. And you got to, focus on playability and making sure things don't fall off too much and stuff. It's got to be able to sort of be moved around very vigorously as kids play with it. So it might be a fun challenge to kind of do that, sort of, keep all those factors in mind and then build a mock kind of fitting those restrictions because, sometimes restrictions can actually really aid your creativity, sort of having... it's why contests are always so good because it's you have to build this specific thing for this specific purpose and you go, cool, I'll do that. Whereas if you're outside of that contest environment, you might be a little like, man, there's so much I could build. I don't even know where to start. Sometimes just getting that stimulus immediately is the best way to let your creativity thrive. So it's a fun little challenge, but also that too, if you're a little bit more new to Bionicle and you still want to build something, but, you haven't played around with techniques as much, so you're not too sure what to do or where to start. Well, that's something to do. Take a look at some of the old original LEGO sets, whatever they may be, and look at some of the designs and just simply take them and put them onto your mock. You might be able to riff them around a little bit, sort of play with them, expand upon them in some fashion, but for the most part, there's literally nothing wrong with just taking it and putting it in your mock. It's not like the LEGO police are going to come down to your house and be like, "We found you, Jim. You stole our techniques." No one's going to be mad. And heck, even if you're using illegal techniques, no one's going to be mad. If you've made a cool mock, that's all that really matters. If it's a little bit more simplistic, still cool. But besides the point, we're talking about Piraka stuff here. Those Piraka heads there as a 2-skull effect. Looks really, really cool. And another thing as well, we take a look at the shoulders here. Those feet being used there to kind of form the basis of the shoulder. They're a slightly different color of white. Just a little fun fact, the set Thok, which was one of the Piraka, he was the white Piraka, his color wasn't in fact quite white. I can't remember the official Bricklink term, but with the power of editing, I'll find it now. And with the power of editing, I found it. It is very light bluish grey, so it's not actually quite white. It's just sort of a little bit off. You can kind of see if you take a look at a little bit of a closer look there on the images. So it's sort of something to consider. It's kind of close enough that you can kind of get away with it if you are just putting other white elements into it. Like we see on this mock here, it's really not that big of a deal. But, maybe you were kind of aiming for that. You kind of want just a slightly different shade of white thrown into your mock. Well, some of Thok's pieces are in that exact color. And you take a look at some of the older Mindstorm sets, some of the white on that is not quite white, but is that specific very light bluish grey. And you can kind of take a look around at some other sets and things, and that color appears in that too. It's a bit more of a rarer color. It's not that common. Really, Thok was kind of the only set that came with it in terms of specifically Bionicle pieces. But, every now and then those parts do seem to pop up. And if you're lucky, sometimes white does get misprinted into that very light bluish grey. Or light bluish grey gets printed into that very light bluish grey. I knew someone once who went to a pick-a-brick wall and they were supposed to have light bluish grey 1x1 bricks there. And in fact, they were that very light bluish grey colour. Just, somehow the printing had just messed up and that's what they came out as. Now, I do believe this is an official colour in the LEGO palette. I don't believe it's actually a misprinted colour, especially because every Thok set had that specific colour in it. But, hey, there's a fun LEGO fact for you about colour schemes and interesting colours. We were just talking about before on Unuku's mock how awesome a colour scheme can be. So, heck, playing around with different colours, especially some of those obscure, interesting ones, that's always something to consider and always something that's a little bit fun to do. I know a whole bunch of mockers who say to me, once I get a cool colour scheme, I'm in. That's my stimulus for a mock, is just figure out an interesting color scheme and go from there. So yeah, love the fact that can be such a stimulus for a mock, such an inspiration point, So if you're someone who's like that, here's a color you can play with. Anyway, that's it for all of our Piraka Skadi themed mocks. Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Bionicle Inspiration series. If you're sitting here and you're like, man, my mock should be on this show, well, guess what? It can be. You can do so by submitting some pictures and some information and all sorts of other stuff to the email that you're seeing on the screen right now. All you got to do is, send some pictures, send a link to the mock if it's posted online, all that sort of stuff. Always prefer a link if you've got it. And just, the name of the mock, your name, all that sort of stuff, and whatever other things you want to put on the email. put it on there, and eventually I'll put it on the show. Whether that's, any random episode of the Bionicle Inspiration series, or specifically the fan-submitted mocks episodes, which are every 10th episode of the Bionicle Inspiration series. Otherwise, be sure to check the links in the description to the mocks that you saw in today's episode, because these guys are some very talented builders, and they've got some other awesome stuff that you should definitely check out. Otherwise, that's it. Happy building. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now. And one last thing. I'll make this abundantly clear in future episodes, but for those people who are still listening, I bumped my mic there. For those people who are still listening, you dedicated fans. Of course, the BioCup coverage is coming soon if you've watched the BioCup trailer on my channel, but for those of you who watched the coverage last year, you know what that means. You know that means until the BioCup is over, you're going to be getting 2 BIS episodes a week. That's right, not just 1 on Saturdays. You're going to get 2. Haven't figured out the day yet that I will be posting the BioCup coverage stuff, but for the most part, you'll be getting 2 Bionicle Inspiration series episodes. 1 will be BioCup related, and 1 will be the typical one that you see every Saturday. So, of course, the Saturday episodes will never change. Never! I love doing them too much. They're always going to happen. But you'll get a bonus one, because BioCup. Yay! So hopefully, that's exciting for you. It better be. Happy building. See you in the next episode. Bye for now.